Hey everybody. So for today's movie review, I'm going to talk about the film Creepshow. It is directed by George Romero and it is written by Stephen King, and it's also based on stories written by Stephen King as short stories. Um, so in Creepshow, you guys, it was released in 1982. Huge deal in what probably happened for back then because Romero was famous for Night of the Living Dead. Stephen King already had a lot of his books published by then. So I'm sure it was a huge deal back in the day. And from what I know, I think it did do well in the box office. I think a lot of people did go and see this one. And it's kind of a cult classic now too. But Creepshow, you guys, in this one we get five different stories all in one film. It's an anthology film, as you might expect, kind of like Trick or Treat, VHS, Tales from the Crypt, all that kind of stuff. And basically, kind of the reoccurring theme I've noticed in this film is something always comes back to life. Like someone dies or something dies, and it comes back to life to haunt that person or thing by the end of the story. Um, and when I review Creepshow 2 here in a little bit, um, I'm actually going to talk about kind of how that film didn't live up to that brilliant thing that this first Creepshow film established. Definitely Romero's skills showed off in this one. The fact that he did Night of the Living Dead and some other horror films. Uh, just I thought this film had a great blend of, horror and camp value and somewhat comedy at some points. And it also plays off the fact that like not a lot of people you know were really happy that kids are reading horror comics back in the day and all that kind of stuff. um, but I guess as far as what I can say without giving too much of the plot away or too much of these stories away, there's one that deals with Father's Day where this girl's kind of she's always kind of doing things for her dad, and she's always he always expects these really beautiful cakes from her, and he wants them really badly. And the story kind of plays off the fact that he wanted those cakes really badly. Another story deals with well, actually, something that kind of reoccurs later in the film is at the opening we have kind of how Creepshow gets set up, where the dad throws the comic book away. He doesn't understand why his son's reading all these horror comics. And if you've seen Halloween 3, that's Tom Atkins who plays the father. He was also the lead character in Halloween 3, and basically it reoccurs. Kind of how that whole him throwing away that comic book away affected the story later on, and kind of how the dad's his kind of the horror story that he encountered as a part of this whole creep show deal. um, so that happened before the Father's Day one. And there was one with where Leslie Nielsen and Ted Danson from Three Men and a Baby. um, you don't really quite know why. I'm going to get to this in the negatives here soon. You don't really know why, but for some reason Leslie Nielsen wants to bury Ted Danson in the sand near a beach shore, and over time the water's gonna hit over his face and it's like eventually gonna drown him. And he also does this to his love interest or spouse or someone important to him also. And he gets to see that televised as the water kind of slowly consumes both him and that TV set. Um, but Leslie Nielsen gets his in the end, based off of his actions with this whole drowning event. Um, there was another story that dealt with this janitor that found a crate at the bottom of like a stairway of some kind of a school or a facility of some kind. I think it's actually a science university, because like there was a scene where like this guy was talking about a science student. But um, basically, there's this creature living in this box, and it's kind of like this gorilla, this really scary looking gorilla living in there. And this guy who for some reason wants to kill off his wife tries to use that to his advantage. um, and then there's another story that actually doesn't last very long. It's probably one of the shorter ones in this film, where there's a guy working at like a research facility, and there's a cockroach problem in the facility, and a power outage happens while the roach infestation is really bad in this laboratory, and the roaches kind of get back to him in the end for killing all their relatives, because like they're all kind of in the same family of cockroaches. Um, so that scene was very gross, and I'm getting into that more in a little bit here. But So basically, you get 5 stories in one. Um, and I also forgot to mention too the story that happens first has a wrap up by the end of the film. So I thought that was very clever. So I really liked Creepshow, guys. I'm going to get right into the positives. I love the comic book effects throughout the film. It was creepy and campy. I loved how the film kind of kept that tone the whole time. I liked how, like I said, the first story continues later on at the end of the film. We can see the continuation, kind of how it all wraps up the whole Creepshow film. Um, and I liked how this they had definitely a book anthology feeling to it. I definitely had the impression like I was reading Night Shift or Four Past Midnight or some of the other Stephen King anthology books where he puts several stories of his into one book. It definitely had that feeling to it, and I really liked how that this film really accomplished that onto film just as well as it has on some of his books. Um, Stephen King actually does have a role in this. It's definitely one of the campier stories where he kind of becomes this. And actually, one story I forgot to mention in here where a guy finds like this meteorite and he kind of becomes this sea moss creature over time, and it kind of just slowly consumes him. I believe it happens right after the Father's Day one or right before the Leslie Nielsen one. Um, with the shore going on with the guy drowning. Um, but Stephen King gets to play that guy that becomes that sea moss creature. Um, it was just a really fun, campy story, and I really liked how they executed it because, especially for back then, for today's standard, it's not the greatest, but for back then, I thought that was very good how they handled it. Tom Savini is in this as a garbage man. If you don't know who Tom Savini is, he did like the makeup effects for Friday the 13th. He was kind of the one that came up with the Jason deformed look in the first Friday the 13th film, and he's also worked on some other huge horror films. I think he's appeared in some of Kevin Smith's films because him and Kevin Smith are good friends in real life, I think. But he's big in the horror industry. He's definitely one of the most well known when it comes to horror makeup. And he gets to actually have a role in this one and not only do the makeup but actually have a role in it also. Um, I was intrigued the whole film. It was definitely a film where, what about my nose there? Um, I was just intrigued the whole time. It definitely kept my attention. Definitely a film where you're not going to feel bored just because there's just so many intriguing things going on in this movie. So definitely, it's really really good in that sense. Like I was talking about before, the whole dead coming back to life theme kept on reoccurring, and I thought Stephen King and George Romero managed to balance that and keep that going the whole film with that theme. For the negatives, you guys, I thought there was some scenes where there just wasn't enough reasoning for certain things. Like I was talking about earlier, I just didn't get why Leslie Nielsen really needed to bury this guy and his love interest and this TV. And I get it's there to tell the story and to tell this short story, but there's just not enough reasoning for that. I really needed to know: is this for revenge? Was this for what did Ted Danson do to really deserve this really horrible death? So I thought the film, like they kept out small things like that really unfortunately hurt it in the long run. So I needed more reasoning for things like that. Also, before the wife dies in the crate story, she's holding the same glass of milk she could have very well drank before driving over to the facility to meet her husband to eventually get killed by this creature. Once again, I have no idea why this woman had to bring that glass of milk with her that was not finished. And it's, I don't know, there just wasn't enough reasoning for why that had to happen. She was just annoying the whole story. But that brings me to my next point. I thought the whole crate story with the monkey and the crate in general was the weakest story in this film. It felt very long for what they were trying to do with it. I thought it was the most poorly acted out of all the stories in this film, and it just felt the most lazily made. It felt like it was the last story they made, that they had to really rush through it in order to get this film out into the world. Um, and if that's really the case, I think they could have just either make one of these other stories longer, like maybe the one with the sea moss creature or whatever, with Stephen King turning into that over time or something, or maybe just a whole different story. I mean, the whole all the other 4 stories were excellent, and then I get to that one, it's just like, oh, what is this one? Um, And there was some occasional unintended bad acting. Once again, that I'm talking about the Crate story when I'm talking about that one. Um, but for the most part, guys, if you haven't seen Creepshow, make sure you do. It's an excellent horror anthology, easily one of the best when it comes to horror anthologies in film. So I give Creepshow a 9 out of 10. Excellent film. And I hope to see you guys here for my next review, which will be for Creepshow 2, the sequel.